Welcome to the first ever episode of the Gila Voices podcast, the only Gila-based community podcast sharing stories from the nation's first designated wilderness area and the ancestral homelands of the Inde, the Apache. This week's episode was conceived in the weeks following the mass firings of federal employees in both the United States Forest Service and the National Park Service. Roughly 4,400 federal employees based in public lands were terminated in early 2025. Sparking concerns of trail closures, forest management, and of course, wildfire preparedness. To start off this podcast, we'll talk to Justin Schatz, one of the 3,400 United States Forest Service employees laid off by the federal government. What's up, Justin? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to the Gila?
So I guess I've been a lifelong outdoorsman. I am originally from Washington. My parents owned some land there on the Puget Sound, so I would spend my days fishing for salmon with my dog Booney.
That's a good name.
Yeah, that's a great name. Oh, he was a great dog, just a big old golden retriever. So I would spend my summers fishing, going crabbing too, and then during the crash of 2007, 2008, my parents lost the house, so then we moved here and we moved into this development in Rio Rancho, which was a bummer at first, but then I was able to drive, and then I discovered the Jemez, which was just in my backyard. So the Jemez was amazing. I mean, it's like some of the best fishing in New Mexico, so it kind of helped with the adjustment here. And then I kind of became trout crazy. And then I discovered the Gila trout, which is it's one of the most endangered trout in the U.S. And so I was just kind of obsessed with just how beautiful that trout was and how hard it was to actually find that trout. I guess going back to the question, so went to high school in Rio Rancho, and then I did my undergrad at UNM in English and philosophy, and then I took a job with AmeriCorps up in the Uintas in Utah as a wilderness ranger. So we mainly worked around Kings Peak, which is the highest peak in Utah, and then just spent my days talking with the public, fishing for tiger trout, which is just like a mix of like a brook trout and like a brown trout. So it's just a hybrid. But so I guess fishing and mountaineering has kind of very much defined where I have lived, where I guess my occupation too. And then after my summer with AmeriCorps in that job, then I moved back down to Albuquerque, and then I worked for the paper there, and I covered mainly water in the Gila, trout, and fire.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was always kind of a hyper focus on conservation. And then I got a call in 2022 about working as a packer up in Wyoming for the Shoshone National Forest. So then that's how I got back into the forest. Then I did a season there, and then I got a call to work as a packer and on the trails here in the Gila at the end of 2022, and that's how I came down to the Gila. Cool. And I haven't left since.
So was that your first experience with the Gila?
No. So I guess because I was still new here, because we moved here in 2010, I also love maps, and so I looked at a map of New Mexico in 2014, and then I just saw this giant green spot in southwest New Mexico. There weren't any towns, almost no roads. Seriously, what is that? The Gila, and then it's the Gila. So then my friends and I started to take a trip or two down here every year back in college, and then we just started to kind of go deeper and deeper into the wilderness, and then I started fishing here, and then we started to backpack, and then I guess my first true experience in the Gila wilderness was back in 2018. We did the old wilderness loop, which is like a 50-mile loop from the West Fork, and then you go over to Pryor Creek, and then you drop back down into the Middle Fork, and that just hooked me. I was obsessed with the Gila.
That's some beautiful nature.
Yeah.
Do you have any favorite spots out there?
Favorite spots? Oh my God. I mean, that is a debate that we've been having with our crew for like the last 2 years. For me, it would probably be White Creek Cabin because that feels like the true heart of the Gila wilderness. But McKenna Park, that is just old growth pondos, and you don't see a soul out there for days, for weeks too. And that's like one of the benefits of working in the Gila too, is that it feels like one of the wildest places and like most untouched spots in the like continental US, which is incredible.
You know, I grew up here and I've spent a lot of time out there. And now that I work in an office, sometimes in my free time, I'll just go to Google Maps and look through the Gila.
Yearning, huh?
So over the last couple months, we've had all of these federal cuts that ended up affecting people working in places like the Gila.
Mm-hmm.
As of today, roughly 3,400 federal employees between the Forest Service and national parks have been cut.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us a little bit about your experience as one of those employees?
Yeah. I mean, what is so amazing about working for the forest too, especially if you do a couple seasonal jobs, is that you meet people from almost every forest, and it becomes a like forest family. So it's just been, it's frustrating what is going on and how little value this administration is putting on our federal and protected lands. It's also just the lack of empathy too, which has been a little jarring too, just because when there was first talk about Musk and Doge and the part that they were going to play in this administration, he said that, we are going to take a very precise look, and then people are going to be let go with severance, with empathy too, and with some respect too. That is not what happened at all. People, they received their calls at like 6 p.m. well after work, and just because I think that they did this with AI, especially with probationary employees too, where the foundation or their reasoning for firing as many probationary employees that they could was because of poor performance, which is just a blatant lie. I mean, it was that that is so far from the actual truth. So I guess now it is called the Valentine's Day Massacre, and that was only the first list too, and that is where we lost 6 out of our 9 crew members, and then
Here in the Gila?
Yep. Well, I mean, here in the Gila, I believe we lost 32 people during that first round of firings, and that is like probably 90% of our field going force. So it's the people who clean up our rec sites, it's the people who work trails, it's the people who actually interact with the public. And I'm like, so what is the forest supposed to do if we don't interact with the public? I mean, if we can't actually work this forest to allow access, to manage fires, to do as much fire prevention as possible, I'm like, so you just basically disabled the forest if you let go all of your field going force. And then so following the Valentine's Day Massacre, because I think that following weekend, so I guess the first list was on Valentine's Day, and then that following weekend they released three more lists. So they released a list on Saturday morning, which we were told on Friday that was going to be the last list. Luckily, no one else from my crew was on that list, and then they released another list on Sunday morning, and then we were like, oh, this isn't over yet. And then my name was also not on that list, and then they released their last list on Sunday evening, like at 6.
2 in 1 day?
Yep, on a holiday too. And then we got a call from our rangers like at 6:30, and then that is when we found out that most of the people were let go too. But from that list too, they also included too a bunch of people who were not on probationary status. So yeah, just the lack of details and the lack of planning has just made this entire process just extremely messy. So it's kind of been just a wild ride.
Man, it seems like it. There's something that you kind of touched on. There's this whole sentiment being spread by people in the Trump administration and in the media that people being cut are either non-essential, they're not showing up for work, they're bad at their jobs, inefficient, all that stuff.
Yeah.
From my perspective, every person that I've ever known to work in the Forest Service doesn't do it just to collect a paycheck, you know? They have a genuine love of the environment and the work.
Yep.
And the stewardship of these lands. So just hearing the insinuations from these people, in my eyes, is kind of like despicable.
Yep. Same here. And I guess so. Most of the field going force too. So this administration was trying to crack down on like remote workers and people who they thought were committing fraud on the American taxpayer. Most people who work on trails or fire too, we are not home at all. We spend probably during a season 90% of our time camping out in some forests. Yeah. So I think in 2024 I was camping out in the backcountry over 200 nights. Yeah, so I was never home too, and they have the audacity to say that, oh, he is not doing any good for the American taxpayer, and that's just, it's just all founded on lies too, and I don't know why they are trying to demonize federal workers and just trying to I don't know, they're almost trying to make the government as inefficient as possible with these cuts, and yeah, I guess what they have been trying to carry out to in the last few months is like it's almost line by line for Project 2025, and it is some of the most sinister moves that I have ever seen just in my very short life so far.
And just to jump off of that, you talk about this lack of empathy within the administration. How'd you feel when you saw Elon Musk running around with that chainsaw, slashing government waste while people like you are losing their livelihoods?
Yeah. USDA has been one of the hardest hit agencies, and well, first off, I don't think that Musk has ever used a chainsaw in his entire life too. So that was kind of a slap in the face too, just because for our job is that we use saws almost every day. They also want to drain this swamp, quote unquote swamp, right? But they're firing all of these people who work in these small rural towns, and there's just really no other work too. Most of these towns too do have a aging population too. So now they're forcing all of these young and educated people out of these small towns because there's really no work here. For people who work in the forests, it is a very focused and almost niche job, which it's very difficult to continue on with that path outside of the Forest Service. It's just he breaks things and then asks questions later too, and I just feel like he doesn't have the best interests of the American people. What is wild too is over 65% of voters out west support parks and forests. And so it's going against the builder too. So this mandate, which I think Trump won with 49.5% of the vote too, it's not a mandate. And I think Musk is beginning to learn that he can't just break things and then ask questions later too, because as we have seen within the last few weeks is that there has been a lot of pushback against Musk. It's very hard just to process what has been going on too, just because they have been trying to move at this breakneck pace too, which is their like shock and awe method.
It's a lot to deal with, man.
Yeah. So it's very hard to just try to be as concise as possible with like just kind of pinpointing what they are trying to do, how it has affected hundreds of thousands of Americans too, and most of my friends who do work for the enforced in like field going jobs, they have been either forced to move back with their parents, or they have had to make a very dramatic change in the course that they were following. Yeah.
How did it feel when you found out that you had been laid off?
I mean, just because we did not know how many lists that they were going to release, it almost felt like a relief. I mean, with great sadness too, but I mean, the hardest part too was just hearing about all of my friends and people who I know who have dedicated their entire lives to the force, or in civil service too, just thousands and thousands too. I mean, from the Valentine's Day massacre on, I was more heartbroken about all of my friends who were let go, and then when I finally got the call that my name was on that list, I just had to completely rethink what I was going to do too. And just because with unemployment too being overwhelmed by thousands of federal workers, like I kind of went into survival mode. Just saying like, okay, I don't have that much money saved up because we do not make that much too. I think on a good year, I'm making $45K per year, and that is a really good year where I get to go out on like 3 or 4 fires. But for people who only work 6 months, they're making maybe like 18K tops. But I guess the positive thing about this entire experience is we organized and we networked, and so now the Forrest family is tighter than ever, which is it has been a pretty special thing, just how everybody came together too from this tragedy. And yeah, I mean, we fundraised, we have spoken out, and now I feel like the Forrest family is tighter than it's ever been.
I guess that's one of those silver linings in any tragedy, right? It brings people closer together.
Yeah, and I mean, you would wish that it was under different circumstances, but and just trying to find our people jobs too, just because they just kind of had the rug swept out from under them. The camaraderie was absolutely incredible. It was pretty cool. Yeah. And
since you were initially laid off, you've been hired back for some ambiguous amount of time, right?
So far, so the judge has ordered the reinstatement to last for 45 days until they can come to a definitive decision. So we are only guaranteed our job until April 18th. So everyone is just kind of holding their breath, their plans too, and it's just very much a very gray and limbo space for thousands of workers. And we really do not know how this is gonna shake out, and we're just kind of waiting, and we can't even make plans now for for both work and for personal lives too. So that's kind of just a very difficult space to be in.
Seems like it's pretty frustrating.
Yeah.
Probably a little nerve-wracking.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any plans for in case it turns out to be permanent?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, I've been picking up odd jobs in silver. I've been helping out with preparing some properties for the upcoming fire season, and then I do have a job lined up in May if things do not work out. But I really do not want to leave the Gila. But luckily, this job is up in the Black Range, so I'll be helping out with trails up in the Aldo Wilderness, which is a pretty cool spot too. Yeah. But I think this might be pushing a lot of people to want to go back to school too, just so we will have more tools in our arsenal not to allow this insanity to happen again. So I'm thinking about going back to grad school or even law school at this point.
Well, that's a great idea.
Yeah. I mean, we can only do so much with the tools that we have now. But I mean, if we just continue to both educate ourselves and also just to connect and organize with as many people as possible, I think that, I mean, sucks that this had to be the catalyst that kind of pushed us towards this route, but I think in like say 5 or 6 years, I think this might actually benefit the forest a bit too. So the people that they fire are some of the most passionate and selfless people in this field too, and so we are not in it for the money. We are in it just to protect this land too, and to allow as many people to experience this in beauty. And really, it has really made more people aware too that we have to fight to protect this land too, because there are forces who do want to take away our federal lands.
So the way things are looking right now, there's still threats of additional cuts to institutions like the Forest Service in the next couple months.
Mm-hmm.
You brought up the danger that fires pose in our communities. Does the Forest Service have any plans to deal with those dangers in the face of these mass layoffs and funding cuts?
Oh, man. So right now, the Forests and Parks and BLM2, we are just in this on pause because hiring has been so difficult. So we are unable to hire the people that we need. And also, too, most of the people who were cut, we all had red cards, which means that we could join a hand crew, shot crew, and just be a frontline wildland firefighter. So the forest is really trying to come up with ways to either restart hiring or just, it's difficult to fight a fire without people, because you can't fight a fire with AI. You need boots on the ground, and you also need those boots to have years of training too. Also too, this is one of the driest winters that we have had in almost living memory, and everyone is just very scared of what's going to happen this season too, because Musk has never fought a fire. Trump has never fought a wildland fire. 20-foot flames coming right at you at like 20 to 30 miles per hour too, while you are just trying to dig line, bring down trees as fast as possible too. They have never experienced that. And them firing as many people as they have, and them not supporting our brave men and women on the ground fighting these fires, which protect towns and cities too, it's just going to leave a lot of rural communities just in a really bad spot in this upcoming fire season. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a bummer, and you can feel how anxious the community is about fire season.
And I guess what is pretty wild too is that now insurance companies, they are not insuring homes who are at high fire risk, which is almost the entire West. Mm-hmm. So now it's almost impossible to buy a home too, and these retired communities too, if their house burns down, they have been out of the workforce now for like 10 to 20 years. So how are they going to bounce back? So it's just the lack of foresight is going to devastate a lot of rural communities in New Mexico.
And I wonder if it is a lack of foresight, or like you said, just a lack of empathy.
Yeah. Well, it's almost, I think it's very clear now. It's that these billionaires have no understanding of just like what happens if you lose your only house and not one of your like 5 mansions. And it's very much it's becoming a us versus them now, which it's always been there, but I think with this administration, it has never been more explicit and open to about the top 1% just very much abandoning the rest of us. And it's wild how the majority of Americans support federal lands and access for everybody too, while the top 1%, they kind of have this wish to not only to privatize both fire and our lands too, but just to kind of very much bar people from experiencing wilderness. And I feel like that is a crime too. I do not think that history is going to look back kindly on these actions.
Oh, I don't think so either.
Yeah.
This is going to be a dark spot.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we are also worried too, just because the Gila does have, it's such a unique ecosystem where we have the Gila trout, the Mexican gray wolf too. And now they are not only going to lose this funding, but they are also going to lose a lot of protections too, which have allowed them to bounce back as much as they have in like the last few decades. Yeah, it's just a lot to grapple with right now, especially too if you're invested in the Gila or any protected land. Yeah.
And how has the community response been for you? It seems like there's been some good support for all the people who were laid off.
Oh yeah, Silver has been absolutely amazing. So the week after that we were fired, Open Space, which they also have the best beers in town, they hosted this fundraiser, and I think for fired employees, they were able to raise over $2,500, and that was just amazing too. We have very much felt the support of Silver, and yeah, no, I mean it's just a very special place. The Gila and the people who live here too. Yeah, I mean, they have been outspoken about their support, and yeah, I mean, they have been doing almost everything that they can to not only call their elected officials, but also just to raise some money for fired federal and forest employees, which has been just a really cool thing.
Man, you love to hear it. And that leads into my next question. Here in southwest New Mexico, national forests and the wilderness are pretty sacred to people. The Gila is like beloved here in Grant County. So there's a lot of people who share the same sentiments that you have, but aren't in your line of work, or maybe don't know how they can start being of service to these lands.
Yeah.
Do you have any words of advice for people who would like to help advocate for the Gila in the face of everything going on right now?
Yeah. So during this experience, what we have found to be most effective is to just call up your elected officials. Yeah, I mean, we have reached out to both our reps and senators too, and yeah, I believe too that this pressure that we've been putting on has had a real effect too, and now people are more aware now that our voice still matters in this fight to protect our lands. So I would say for anyone that does want to get involved, just reach out, call, email, and just speak out. Now is not the time to be silent. Mm.
Now is not the time to be silent. What a powerful takeaway for that moment. Using your voice to educate, to affect change, is one of the core pillars of stewardship, and it's one of the greatest tools that we have in the face of threats to public and ancestral lands. Federal cuts and policies threatening places like the Gila do not only affect federal employees, they also cascade down to all aspects of communities surrounding these public lands. Next, we talk to Patrice Mutchnick of Heart of the Gila and explore how nonprofit organizations support the Forest Service and what federal budget cuts mean for them and the communities they serve.
My name's Patrice Mutchnick.
And could you tell us a little bit about the organization that you're with?
The organization that I founded is called Heart of the Gila. And that's the organization I direct as well. It's small, so it's self-founded. I do have a board. And we started in 2017. That's when we incorporated as Heart of the Gila. But the idea conceptually came earlier, as originally as a group of stewards. We called ourselves Gila Hot Springs Stewards. Those local people who wanted to interact with the Forest Service from an organized standpoint and were willing and committed to do their share to take care of the lands that we lived around. Because we're centered right here in Gila Hot Springs, New Mexico, and it's right in the heart of the wilderness. So we evolved as a community group
So you got the perfect name.
That's right. And later on, I formalized the organization really as a pivot from the death of my daughter and her two friends, Ella and Michael, who passed in 2014. And we wanted to do something that honored their lives as environmental advocates. So I merged the idea of caretaking for the land and having a group that took care of sort of project-type things on the land, and merged that with the conceptual idea of honoring the lives of young people who loved the land and to try to foster a love of land. And so that's why there's the heart in there. So we're called Heart of the Gila, and we're situated up here in the heart of the Gila wilderness.
Beautiful. So what kind of things does your organization do for the Gila?
Since we came from this stewardship piece originally, we have active projects where we get out and do things that essentially steward public land. That could be simple things like going into front country campsites and cleaning up after people, or dismantling fire rings to prevent fires in the Gila. It could be removing non-native species from trailheads and around water bodies. Sometimes the stewardship work is just learning. I consider that stewardship as well. And that's one of the things we do. And then we do environmental education for young people and adults and all ages, all subjects. And then probably maybe what we've been out in the public for is our advocacy, where we're doing activist work that's particularly designed to foster protection of wild places. And we're centered in the Gila as a watershed concept, that we're focused on rivers as our guiding principle of what we're aimed to protect, what we aim to teach about, and what we foster the love of. So we're part of different advocacy efforts, like Peaceful Gila Skies, keeping fighter jet pilot training out of the Gila. That's one of our pieces that we work really hard on. We're part of the coalition of groups that supports a wild and scenic designation for the Gila. And then there are smaller advocacy things, like we got on the ground with the folks cleaning up that tar spill that happened locally. For those who remember, we had a big oil tar spill in the Gila just about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago.
Oh, I don't think I remember that.
Oh, yeah, that was on Route 15, a tractor trailer overturned that was carrying liquid emulsion asphalt, and it turned over right near Meadow Creek. For those of you who are from here, you're going to recognize that, and those who don't, it's one of the hairpin turns coming in the wilderness. Actually, it's in the southern part of the wilderness, and it overturned, and emulsion spilled, and nobody reported it. And some locals came on it and began to clean it up by themselves. And it was sort of a grassroots movement to clean up this site. And then some of the other groups got on board to help pressure the agencies to do their work and to take care of things. So, so from more local issues to regional concerns about public land issues, such as like now where we focus on large scale on fighting back the current administration's executive orders on increasing timber production on national forests. So from the small to the larger pictures.
So from your own experience, how much does the Forest Service depend on nonprofit organizations like yours to supplement their work?
Did you say the Forest Service itself? Well, and I think I was thinking about that and sort of the broader question, because there's land agencies, all different land agencies, right? National parks, Bureau of Land Management. There's fishing. There's wildlife preserves like the Bosque up in Socorro, the Apache. What is that called? The Socorro, the Bosque de Apache. Right. So that's a wildlife refuge. So they have a friends group as well, right? There's a friends of the Bosque, locals who take care of coming in and doing the same thing that we do down here, removing non-native species and educating people. Those are probably all volunteer. So I think that there's a long history with public lands having the accompanying communities that live nearby that care about them and provide services to protect, steward, and educate. That goes back to the beginning of having public lands. The first parks had volunteers. The first forests were really started by communities. There was a community in New England that lived in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and they brought the idea to Congress through their own congressman and essentially helped write the Weeks Act, which started the Forest Service. So partner groups have always been there with the agencies because they were lands that people loved before they were designated parks and forests.
Absolutely.
So I think that's, and I think actually that the relationships just have become probably more formalized over the years.
So speaking of that formalized relationship, do you think that there's more flexibility for these nonprofits than there is for some of these other institutions like the Forest Service? Or do you kind of have to exercise within the same boundaries as them?
I think that the relationships have gotten more formal, so the boundaries there's more boundaries than there used to be. I think it was a little easier to do things on the forest than it is now. But the relationships I think that they're different in different places. But I was starting to think how, essentially you've always had them, and one is like, and I'm a woman, so there's no bias here, but sort of like the two brothers, you have the brother that is creative and goes out and gets things done and is on the ground and, got the tools in their hand. And then you have the brother who's like, wait, we should figure this out first. And, we need to get all the rules down. And I don't think we should go out there without permission. And so essentially it's like you have, the brother that has all these governmental structures and rules and laws that they have to follow, which is reasonable. And then you have, the younger brother who can actually get things done, faster because they don't have as many layers of bureaucracy. But that said, the Forest Service has learned how to use partners because of that. Because they know we have less of that bureaucracy, we can respond sometimes quickly to things.
So it's something that they can use to their advantage.
To their advantage. There's other things like I've heard from agency people. So many environmental groups, they don't just act as, helpers and stewards, but they act as watchdogs. See, this is a big part of that, right? So say you have a project that the Forest Service initiates, whether it could be it could be a diversion on a forest, or it could be a timber cut, or it could even be a road that a park wants to put in. They have to engage the public in those decision-making processes. That's part of our National Environmental Policy Act, so it's something that's built in. Mm-hmm. And I've heard agency people, of course, they complain about this, right, because it's harder for them to get whatever project they want done. But on the other hand, they know the service it provides to keep them mission-oriented. Mm-hmm. And I've had, not maybe every district ranger, but I've had rangers say, we need the opposition. We need the pushback so that we can make sure we're doing what we're mission-driven to do. So that's the other relationship, is that environmental groups and partner groups, depending upon their individual missions, not all of them are policy-oriented, but we push the agencies to protect the resource if we think that it's not being protected.
Cool, kind of like best practices of stewardship for these big government agencies.
That's right.
And yeah, that's really something I hadn't thought of before.
Yeah, that's a really important role, is to share the oversight to some extent.
Well, thinking about that in the face of all of the budget cuts and policy changes coming down from the federal government, if the last couple months prove anything, it's that our institutions aren't rock solid.
Exactly. Good point.
So especially given the recent layoffs here.
In the Gila.
What does that mean for nonprofits like you who support the Forest Service?
It's interesting that over the years, I think the relationship ebbs and flows with partner groups and agencies depending upon available funding and the nature of funding. So some things, like some relationships, are based on actual contractual agreements and sharing. I got an agreement that said I'm going to do a particular task from the Forest Service, and I've got to go do it. So some of these are quite formal, and we're not subcontractors like a business would be, but we have these agreements where we say we're going to do this, and the federal agencies will funnel money to us through their own grant writing, through their own grant processes. And this has increased over the last decade or two, especially here in the Gila, where the forest gets money, but it's expected it's going to go out the door to partner groups or contractors. And so that's kind of become part of the norm. And so it got so integrated that way. So there's a lot of us who had bought into that structure and had money coming in to do this work. And so it didn't just affect the Forest Service, but affected the pipeline of funding that was already appropriated for these things to do, for nonprofits to do. So it really has a ripple effect in the economy that people I don't think really understand in some of these, what you'd call frontier communities that are part of, on the edges of public agencies. We're so dependent on that. And our community has this interrelationship. Not every nonprofit has the same, but I would say I heard from half a dozen that had these things, whether it's from food issues or some of our food security organizations were affected, and in the Gila, and then the land agency pieces were affected. So it's not just one cause. So did you ask me how it was affected or how we could do? I lost the thread of my...
Well, I asked how stuff like this could affect these nonprofits.
Yeah, and so they just generally could just lose your funding, and we're on hold. So it's like right now. Some things have been. We were verbally told, "Don't spend any money. We can't sign a check for you." And I'm like, "Well, we have a contract." And then they're like, "Oh, we're not going to sign you. Don't do anything. Don't do any work. Don't do any work." And then like the next week, it's like, "Oh, you can do some work." And then it's like, "But we're not sure how and when." So there's just a lot of unknowns about how the work can proceed or not proceed. That's how that's gotten our effect directly in terms of that. Some folks don't depend on money as much, and then you just have to rely on that there's anybody to answer any questions or interact with you in any kind of bureaucratic way. Like you could make a call and there's nobody around, or those kind of things. Like staffing just gets really thin, and the Gila was already known to be understaffed, and so I've heard tell that the Gila is a different breed, that it is very ghostly, like it is hard to find people on the ground. It's hard to find people because we're so big and we have so few people covering. The agency does such a big territory. So so we've been talking to the Forest Service on how we can help them adapt, but there are things that we just can't do.
Like what?
Well, I think this came up in conversations we've had with other nonprofits. We want to be able to provide some services for the Forest Service, but we don't want to provide the services that people who were fired provided. That doesn't feel right, because that doesn't promote the idea that these are valuable jobs, and federal service and land agencies need that help. So we've kind of been walking a balancing act, but one thing my organization is trying to do is at least to help the Forest Service find and recruit volunteers for things they normally have volunteers for. So they don't even have a person to do the recruiting to get the people they normally would get to volunteer. Ooh. So I thought that seems a reasonable way to help that. I can do that outreach to the community for volunteers, because that's something that I would do normally anyway. We'd always be looking for people who want to help volunteer and work on public lands. So that's some way that I'm trying to be helpful. We'll see how that pans out.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I really do hope it works out.
Just so that a lot of work doesn't get done, what happens is that it'll just contract projects, contract things that, maybe they're wildlife rehabilitation projects or restoration projects that the forest wants to engage in. Their activities are going to be contracted. That's what's going to contract. They're just going to stick to the essentials and not be able to do anything outside of maybe getting toilet paper at the catwalk. People, bring your own toilet paper to the catwalk.
BYOTP. So there's this whole question about partner groups and what they could do in terms of all of these diminishing resources that could affect the Gila.
Right.
On the flip side, there's this other question of how much should be done. It seems like there's more and more pressure being put on the local communities and like these nonprofits to kind of take care of it themselves. So is it a whole thing of where they would want these nonprofits to pick up more slack so the federal government can justify defunding?
Right. Well, that's what I was saying. Like we're conscious of that. We don't want to play into that. We don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I mean, this is a singular case because in some ways partner groups can do some things, like trail work potentially and things like that. But this is not the answer, because obviously for many agencies we couldn't do the work. It's not like we have, we can't just snap our fingers and get a ornithologist to do the studies, or for that matter a nurse to go visit a veteran. So it's a little different when you're talking about cleaning out a campsite, and maybe we don't need that many people to clean out campsites, but it's not there's no logic to the argument. We need both. We still have to pay people to do the work. We can't expect volunteers to come every day and do visitor services. It's not going to work that way. No. So I don't think there's really a logical or practical way that we could really do that much anyway. I mean, we can do more of what we already do, but we can't do much of the things that they were doing, that people were doing as their jobs every day. Mm-hmm. Like I just passed some graffiti on Route 15, which, by the way, don't do that. So there was some graffiti right on Route 15, right in the Cherry Creek, McMillan area, which is one of our most really beautiful birding areas and super diverse and highly visited area.
I just passed there.
Mm-hmm. So beautiful, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And, there's graffiti. So I wonder if those guys still have a job, because a couple of years ago, I was like, oh, there's this graffiti. And I call up the Forest Service and they said, yes, we have, we'll send our maintenance crew out. And the maintenance crew came with the power washers and this and that, and they got out there. And, that seems like a silly example, but it's like, that is an everyday example of maintaining the integrity of our public lands. Now, that said, I've had a volunteer group up in Mineral Creek taking care of graffiti. And I've done that several times. And that's a useful job for us. That's a cool thing that we can do. Yeah. But that was something I could plan for 6 months and, got out there and went up Mineral Creek. That's something, okay, over time. We can maybe look at a problem area and try to participate in solving a problem. Mm-hmm. But we can't respond like as if the owning agency to the problems. I can't go out and go with my power washer, and I can't go put out that fire, and I can't go tell that guy to get out of that camping site, and I can't respond as if I'm the agency. I can take a long view and help you do some stuff, but...
And I mean, that just makes sense. For most people, especially unpaid volunteers, doing that long term is just unsustainable.
Yeah, no, it's just something you do as a meaningful experience. It's not your full-time job. So anyway, that's... I think the thing I wanted to just kind of return to with this idea of partners and nonprofits, and it's that the Gila is exceptional. Maybe it's like this in other places too, but the Gila is an exceptional place because we have so many people who live near it that love it so darn much. Now, I'm sure that's like that in other parks and so forth, but we actually have communities that live around it and have lived around it for, centuries. Yeah. And so there's this relationship, and I don't know, that's why people do what we do here. It's doing it from this place of just deep-rooted love of the place. And it's sad for us to see things, the land can just be by itself. We don't need people to do anything to it. It's really about the visitors and the interactions with the public where this landscape needs help. And so, it's not just about we're here. It's about us when we're here because we love this place, so we're tending to it and trying to help secure its longevity and protect it, but and make a living from it. Like many people. But we can't. It's really about the public and the larger public that is being served through public agencies. Absolutely. If that makes sense. Yeah, it's kind of so we're lucky because we have all these people to love this place, but I don't know if this exists in other communities. Like, I don't know what other communities are doing or who live, other parks and other agencies where they are at. I'm kind of curious how this is playing out in other places.
It would be cool to see. And just jumping off of that, there's this overwhelming sentiment that the Gila is something good. And it's something that we want to protect. And I think, especially now with everything going on, a lot more people want to get involved with stewardship, but might not know where to start or might not know what they can do as one individual. Do you have any words of advice for those people?
Well, I'm going to step back from it just for 1 second because the context for us doing this has to do with the situation. Like, this podcast is somewhat about what's happened nationally, right? And about the pulling of resources from agencies across the country. And in our situation, the Gila National Forest, watching our neighbors be affected and seeing this in real time. So just to address like that larger context, to always know that your voice itself, your opinion itself, makes a difference in how this country moves forward. I just feel like that I want people to feel that, and I believe that. It doesn't always seem that way because we can lose hope and perspective, but you want to turn the wheel as much as you can in the direction you think it should go, and you have a voice. What was one of the things that my daughter was really good at was speaking up for the things she believed in. Even though she was an introverted person and wasn't particularly outgoing, she stood up and said the things she had to say. So whatever context that is, whether it's in a meeting or at social media or as a letter to the editor or clicking on a petition link or whatever it is, you should feel that that it's a powerful choice that you're making. And that if you feel powerless over these situations, do anything that expresses what you believe. That would be my first, just to say. And then secondarily, if you get your hands dirty, it's going to feel even better. So when you actually do something and physically, particularly on the landscape, you feel that you're giving and it's a meaningful relationship and you just feel better about it. So I would say you don't have to get involved with a group to make a difference. In all honesty, I wish someone would just can someone walk down Route 15 and pick up the cans and bottles? I know it seems like you didn't put them there, but it just has to be done every couple of months. And that's a good volunteer job. That we don't have that tradition that much in the Gila of adopting a piece of the highway because it's all like federal. But they could kind of use some help out there. So, just simple things and organizing in a place that you love. Where do you love in the Gila? Where do you love in the out of doors? Go make a difference there. Clean up somebody else's mess. That's just the nature of taking care of this place. It just is. And, of course, if you wanted to be involved with something structured, that's easy to do as well. There's multiple organizations that have meaningful projects happening right now. And it's funny because I could mention my colleagues at the Gila Resources Information Project and Gila Conservation Coalition. They have a bio blitz coming up for Earth Day and a cleanup and tree planting that's happening. So there's so many opportunities to actually make a difference. So I would say any of those groups, New Mexico Wild has good opportunities, and Heart of the Gila has opportunities that you can come and work with us. But it doesn't matter what it is, you know. You could go and clean up Cameron Creek in Santa Clara on Earth Day. I hear they're going to do that. So, yeah, I guess that's what I would say is keep your voice powerful, say something, do something, and go and take care of a place that you love, even if it's not in a structured way. And if you have extra money, you can always support groups. I always say, if you can't do it, go give your money to somebody who can.
Well, I think that's a beautiful sentiment to end on. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as you're doing something. Say something, do something, and take care of the place that you love. Patrice brings up an amazing point. The Gila has been loved by communities for centuries. The original inhabitants of these lands were the Inde, the Apache, for whom the Gila continues to hold important historical, ancestral, and spiritual significance. The indigenous connection to public lands raises some important questions. There are certain times, like the beginning of 2025, when the public feels that our public lands are threatened, but for many, these lands have always been under threat from the federal government. Next, we talked to Joe Saenz of the Chiricahua Apache Nation to explore an indigenous perspective of current and past threats to the Gila.
Sha embatsu nabetin shima wichol shita tihende tagute hahanda andebena. My name is Joe Saenz, and I'm a local resident of Grant County. I live in Arenas Valley, and I'm a descendant of the Warm Springs red paint people from the band of the Chiricahua Apaches that we refer to as Tihende, red paint people. I live in Arenas Valley, and I operate, owner-operator of Wolf Horse Outfitters, which is a horseback riding service that takes people into the Gila National Forest and in some cases around different areas of this region. So I'm directly involved culturally, historically, economically with what they refer to as the Gila National Forest. That is just one part of it, of what we consider where we live. But in talking about the Gila itself, we refer to it as Ndebena, means Apache land. The Gila, what they refer to as the Gila National Forest, the Gila Wilderness, that is actually what was designated for us as our northern stronghold. And so we considered this area northern stronghold and considered the Sierra Madre down further south into Mexico as the southern stronghold. And so we use those areas as base of operations. So this area ties directly to us, our band specifically, but to a certain extent, it's our sacred ground.
So for a lot of people, the Gila is this federally designated forest and wilderness area.
Yeah.
And for some people, there's also this deep spiritual ancestral connection. There's probably no people more affected by federal policies in the United States than indigenous communities. In early 2025, there were some policy changes and budget cuts that could end up affecting places like the Gila. Do you foresee any of these changes affecting indigenous communities surrounding these public lands?
Well, first of all, I have to, state that I'm rather ignorant of policies, that I'm rather ignorant of some of these laws that are in place regarding the national forest itself. I see everything as basically in a practical sense. That's how I was kind of brought up throughout my time, throughout living in different places, becoming involved with different communities, different tribes. It just seems that what is being considered as the Gila National Forest, and that is, it's a lot deeper. Like you're mentioning, it's just a lot deeper connection to it, in that this land itself has always been under threat. As Apaches, we did our best throughout history because of our creation stories of how we are here. our covenant, our responsibility, our gifted responsibility of taking care of that land. Throughout time, that was our efforts, was to protect this land and maintain it in a way that we had been taught to use it. You jump forward into the late 1800s, now you have the colonists, now you have the Europeans that are coming in and viewing this land as a bountiful land of resources. And our efforts to protect it, of course, in different philosophies will lead to war. What has followed was the fact that we were not able to hang on to this country. We just got pummeled pretty hard, and our cultural ethic of trying to survive, we had to adapt, we had to, accommodate. In some cases, we hid really well. But the interesting part was that now that there was a European impact into this area, all of a sudden you get people like Aldo Leopold. Now somebody else has popped up that's saying, hey, we need to protect this. Hey, we need to do this, blah, 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 as much as he could through his restrictions of career and everything he was involved in, which I don't know the man very well, but just the fact that, he's pretty well known and considered a pioneer in wilderness and stuff like that. So now we have this effort by this American capitalistic structure coming into this country and viewing this, which I think this is the worst thing they could have ever done to this country, was turn it into a multiple use area. As the philosophy of the Forest Service was, multiple use, we can take water, minerals, timber, grass, everything. Let's just use it up. And that was the worst thing they could have done for this country. But that's what all of a sudden wilderness, national forests, they were involved in promoting those kind of uses and supporting them and actually defending them in some cases, even though they were violations to what was there. And now all of a sudden, now you got NGOs. Now you got the Wilderness Society. Now you got, Wild Earth Guardians. So it's a whole nother wave of, hey, don't do this to this country. This country is, So it's not something new that has come up as far as the importance to some of us of why we decide to step up and speak and say something regarding the uses and the abuse of this country. I can pinpoint exactly how this country has changed dramatically, that actually has been caused by the people. The very people who are supposed to be taking care of it are the ones that have changed it. And it's unrecognizable almost in some cases. So, the effort of saying, hey, we need to, reestablish practices that are going to steward this country like we were supposed to. You hear rumors, how the policies regarding fire, maintenance, trail maintenance, all of that, research, whatever they're doing to study, I always hoping that all this studying is actually to better the environment, not to catalog the demise of it. That's what I fear. You see all these people studying, and it's like, well, are they studying something that's disappearing, just like they did us? Once we started disappearing, all of a sudden we were interesting. And people wanted to know, what are you guys up to? What are you doing? Where were you? Same thing with this land. And it seems that whatever happens to the land around us is exactly the same thing that happens to the native people that depended on that land. I mean, the level of responsibility, care, and impact and importance, especially for Apaches, has several levels of why it is a vested interest for us to try to continue to protect this land. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it sounds like sometimes there's this disconnect between your cultural values towards these lands and the federal government's oversight or use of them. In your experience, do these federal agencies work with indigenous communities to address those cultural needs within their own work?
Well, my understanding is that it's a requirement of a lot of, whether they're projects or work that's going to happen, or any research, is that they are mandated supposedly by law to reach out to Indian communities. Our concern is that our own history is used against us, which has always been, kind of a dirty way to fight. I think, it's and so for us, because of our unique status, they've decided to use that as an ability to deny our voice when it comes to us speaking up about sacred areas. We had a conference regarding mining and environment. I think it was sponsored by Wild Earth Guardians. There was a conference, and we attended a dinner. And at the dinner, this gentleman walked up to me, and he said, are you part of that Apache group? And I said, yeah, we're called Chiricahua Apache Nation. He said, I understand you guys are against mining. And I said, well, yeah, you could say that we are, but we're realistic. We're not cavemen. We know what's going on. We see what's going on. We understand it better. And, there's got to be a restraint. There's got to be some kind of effort to self-govern yourself. And, but the gentleman continued to say, well, are you guys ready to give up hot water? Are you ready to give up copper pipes? Are you ready to give up all this stuff? And I had to stop him and say, hey, wait, there's a reason why they called us Warm Springs Apaches. We had warm water. We didn't need to pipe it. So, that level of understanding of our country and really what it means, you have to be careful, because English in itself as a language is very deceptive, very deceptive language. And just something that we have to be careful of how they word things, how they phrase things, And so sometimes they themselves are subject to it, just like that gentleman. He's going off on me about warm water and copper pipes, and totally ignorant of the fact that there was a cultural trait of why we lived here,
I did want to follow up on one of those things that you said. You said that they often use your own history against you.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Our whole fight with the established modern American perception of history here in the Americas, especially North America, what is called North America, it's referred by many people, Turtle Island, all that, to us, again, because of our locality and our respect for the land that we were gifted. That is what we call Ndebena. But the history that has been promoted and advocated has been the land bridge theory of all natives coming from the north going south. And so there's cultural perceptions that have been taught in school and have been promoted about native behavior, native life ways, what we did for a living, how we lived. And especially for Apaches, our whole code of ethics was peace and harmony. And it wasn't just about people, it was also with the environment of how we balanced ourselves, how we maintained balance. And so because of our cultural trait that we didn't leave much, we didn't carry much, we didn't build buildings, we didn't build, anything of that nature. Even just in the last 10 years, you can still hear it. But you guys didn't leave anything. So you couldn't have been here. And it's like, but we were, that was just our culture not to leave anything. That was on purpose. And so just the fact that is situated and worded that way, they tell us, you weren't here. And so our culture of low impact, minimal equipment, light movement, light use is actually the reverse to them and says, oh, look, you didn't leave anything. We don't see any track of you. And it's like, I got to remind people, hey, that wilderness with all those trails up there, it wasn't the CCC that put them in. They were already there. We Apaches use that country like highways. We had a lot of movement through there, way up in those Mogollons and all the way to Daddle and Reserve and, all that country. Just the fact that we could live in the environment without having to build a home and build a garden, it just baffles people, They only see that on TV with Survivor and Alone, and they think it's a game, they think it's some kind of challenge. But no, we had perfected a way of living in this environment that created people that were amazing. We recently developed that map poster that we put up for sale. We thought it was really important for us to establish our cultural boundaries so people could understand a little bit more about us. And the funny thing about that is that when we were promoting the map, people didn't realize at first, but we started asking people, well, now that you see how our country is, where the boundaries are, and how far extent our country went, do you now see why the cities are where they are, where the highways are where they are, and all of that? And it makes sense, you know. And, you know, I tell people, you know, if you're in Silver City and you got to go to Phoenix, you got to go to Tucson, you got to go to Albuquerque, you got to go, it's like, it's 4 to 5 hours, no matter which way you go. 3 to 5 hours, no matter which way you go. And I got to remind people, there's a reason for that. This was our stronghold. This was the center of our stronghold, you know, and we were geographically placed in the center of it. And so it was difficult for people to get to us into this country, you know, because it's so big and we knew it so well that, you know, it was to our advantage. So, yeah. Yeah, and to me, that because a lot of cultures all around the world did that. But the fact that we did it here should actually inform people of just our length and duration being here. That we understood we didn't have to carry our food. We didn't have to grow it. We didn't have to build homes. We could move through this country just like the wind, just like the animals. And we ate the exact same thing the animals did. You know, specifically when you ask people, well, you know, what do you think Indians ate? You know, the first response that you get, you know, kind of in a general sense is, well, they were hunting a lot. And it's like, no, you know, that there's a different way to live. A lot of tribes, yeah, they depended on it, they adapted to it. But for what we had in this, you know, to a certain extent, our Garden of Eden, you know, we had everything here. Medicines, foods, you know, beverages, you know, minerals, everything that we needed to survive and be a healthy, strong people. And the fact that we knew every inch of it should tell you that, you know, that we've been intimate with this land for a long, long time. Yeah.
You know, I do a lot of research in this part of the world, and it seems like there's always this kind of maybe double standard, a disconnect or something, where in times of crisis, there's rightfully public outrage because people are affected. But historically, there's not the same outrage of policies affecting indigenous communities that continue to this day. So I wanted to ask, for people who might have little knowledge of the indigenous perspective, are there any places where they can start to learn that perspective?
Well, you know, I think the fact that it's sort of understood that, you know, like the Forest Service, how they operate and what their stuff is, to me, it just seems a real fractured way of looking at everything. You know, it's very focused, very lasered on just certain items, and that's the scientific way. The general philosophy, native philosophy, always encompassed what we've heard called, it's a holistic culture, because we incorporate everything in our decision making, whether it's religion, whether it's biology, whether it's chemistry. Everything was considered as a native perspective. Modern science seems to break things into little items and little parts, and they understand those parts really well, but sometimes it takes a lot longer for them to understand how everything ties in. But that information and that knowledge for general America and the scientific community seems to all be there. It's just that perspective of how to use that information. You know, several years ago with the Forest Service, for the very first time, we had a superintendent that came in, and all of a sudden, for the first time maybe that I've ever known, this superintendent said, we're not going to fight fires in the wilderness. You know, that's going to be a policy, and we will only monitor them, but not fight them. And that was a great change. You know, I thought, man, that's, you know, she knew, she had information, she had knowledge, but she chose to use it. And so at times we know there's people out there that have all this information, knowledge, but they choose not to use it, or to, you know, subvert it or change it.
And for the people listening right now who might not know, are the Chiricahua Apache federally recognized?
We believe that we are because we are all part of the 1852 treaty that Mangus, Colorado signed with, I think it was Carleton. But in reality, to a certain extent, I think it's only the Fort Sill people that are federally recognized because of the prisoner status. With the rest of us, since we decided not to surrender, that's been our lot in life. We knew what was going on. And what people don't really understand is that group of prisoners that surrendered, they were the ones that were going to take the heat, to take away that perception that these wars and killings were going on. They were still happening in Mexico till 1940. But for us, that sort of put a stop to it. And then the dangers and the violence kind of went on a individual basis. There was still violence and killings going on. But that particular group is the one that got that designation. The rest of us are working to be, we hate to say the word recognized. It's more like acknowledged. The recognition is all over there because of the treaty. The Apaches in Mexico, they just finished their state recognition, and so they're going for federal recognition. So as we've always said, it's the rest of us that ended up staying behind are the ones that are now working to, be included in that fabric of our history. Yeah. Not to be too hallmark.
So much of identity is entwined with place. Do you think that policies that endanger the Gila could affect your chances of gaining that federal acknowledgement?
Well, that's a tough question because we're not dealing with practical people. We're not dealing with an established process. Each administration deals with things differently. And every administration is a risk for us because we've been hearing forever that certain presidents have, spoken or uttered the words that, if they're able to, they would abrogate all treaties with all natives throughout North America. The reality of that, I think it would be pretty difficult. Not necessarily, because the land is still going to be here. We're still going to be Apache. Even if it's turned into one big copper mine, we're still tied to this land. I mean, there's nowhere for us to go. When I chose to come back here, I chose to live here, even though, people ask me why. And it's like, you got all these copper mines around here in the Forest Service and, they ignore you guys. And it's like, but it's not about that for us. For me, I feel at home. I remember the great-grandparents' statements and how they would talk. And so that connects me to this place. And so I feel at home. And the only thing we can do is be that voice. But no, I don't, like I said, we hope it doesn't come to that we're sitting on we're standing on a pile of gravel saying, this is my country. We'd rather be able to say, these mountains, this forest, these meadows, these rivers, these creeks, that's our legacy, that's our heritage. What happens to that country is going to happen to us. That statement will always be there.
So I guess the gist of what I'm getting here is like, whatever policy changes come down from the federal government is kind of like nothing new.
No, we initially, the way that we saw miners, trappers coming in here and taking everything, if it was about losing those kind of things and us having to be refugees and run away, that's what we would have done. But even to date, we say what we have is a collective consciousness of this country because, whether people are coming back from around the world or from across the country or even from Oklahoma, we've all been drawn to this place. And then meeting people that have lived here all their lives that have a descendancy, it's like, let's all get together. I recently spoke with one of the gentlemen that was involved in the Lipan Apaches from Texas getting state recognition. Recently they got it. And he said, that it took all the Lipans getting together to reestablish that. And that's what we got to do here. All these groups, all these people people that live in the area that are descendants, that know their descendants. We should all get together and be a voice, including Fort Sill, including the Chihena and Dea, including the Apaches in Mexico. But yeah, it's the same thing, is that we're all coming back to this area. We're not running away from it.
So, all of these people that you're talking about, we all have this vested interest in protecting the Gila. What do you think are the most important things people can do in their day-to-day lives to contribute to the stewardship of the Gila?
Man, it's heartbreaking every moment, every day that I drive into town. It's heartbreaking because you see all the trash on the highways, you see all the dead animals, and I think as individuals we need to take the responsibility that we need to be careful with this country. Everything you do, everything you eat, everything you touch, you need to be conscious of it. You need to know that as humans, we just discard naturally. That's just a natural tendency for us. But that's where it takes a little bit more. At what line do you become an obnoxious person as to where you're standing up for something good? I've stopped trying to use straws and single item things. I try not to leave things. I've taken that whole idea of Apaches leaving no trace to heart. I don't leave trash anywhere. I went to Europe one time to go visit, and I came back, and when the Border Patrol opened my suitcase, they said, "What the hell is this?" I said, "That's my trash." "Where do you leave yours?" And he was baffled. And it's like, well, I try not to leave things. If I go eat somewhere, I ask, "Do you have reusable stuff?" No, I don't want straws. We learned growing up how to drink out of a jar. But not just those little facts, of single use, but that is just sort of the tip of it. Then it goes into, well, how do you behave in your environment? What can you do to lessen this? Okay, you go up into the wilderness or you go hiking, talk to people. That's what I've tried to do before. Hey, the Forest Service isn't going to do this for us. We need to do this as individuals. Pick up trash, talk to people, make sure people are safe. All forms of good things that should be a part of your experience when you're outdoors. And historically, that's that connection that, why it's so strong for us.
Talking to all of these different people, it's obvious to see that the Gila means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But throughout all perspectives, one theme continues to emerge as an undeniable linchpin between opinions and sentiments. This land is important to us, and all of us, whether it's because of morality or values or love or culture, have a responsibility to advocate for this land when it's in need, and to care for it always. Whatever threatens the Gila, be it government policy, economic realities, or historical circumstance, if we continue to use our voice, to take action when we can, then like the land itself, we will endure. This has been the Gila Voices podcast. Hasta later.